Hello and welcome everyone to Institute of Politics YouTube channel. My name is James Talberg and I'm again here excited to be with my colleagues Marina Chirinkova and Ruslan Bortnik. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, James.
We have to cover a very important topic that we have in the past week, negotiations between the United States and Ukraine and Saudi Arabia. What they have achieved out of these negotiations, how difficult were they are, and if there is anything tangible that we can discuss and grasp into what was happening behind the closed doors. Marina, what do you think United States were trying to achieve out of these negotiations between the United States and Ukraine?
My personal view is that the main goal of those negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, the main goal is sitting inside of United States, because the victory which President of United States wants to demonstrate, that victory for internal politicians. Of course, that's a very good attempt try to be a mediator between Russia and Ukraine, but we all experienced people and we've been through those negotiations or those type of negotiations before, and I'm not very optimistic at all as far as the final really long-term standing peace. However, I do understand the President of the United States wants that victory for internal policy in order to prove that he is a great deal maker, that he is a really well connected person, respected by different countries and different leaders. And I will reiterate myself, the main message of all those negotiations are for United States.
Ruslan, Ukraine was in a very difficult position because that meeting, the negotiation meeting, has followed after the scandal in the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump. What positions and what starting points Ukrainian team delegation was entering into those negotiations, and what do you think they were trying to achieve or protect during these negotiations?
I think that Ukraine had to go to many concessions in dialogue in Jeddah with United States counterpart, because the situation for Ukraine and Ukrainians at that moment was very, very bad, and the general development of the situation was very dangerous for Ukraine. I want to remind the scandal in the Oval Room of the White House between the presidents, which provoked the freezing of the military aid to Ukraine and intelligence support, which also made a negative influence on the situation on the battlefield, and maybe it has some influence even for Ukrainian withdrawal from the Kursk region. So we had a scandal before this meeting. We had a stopping and freezing the military aid, a very bad situation in the front line. And of course, in this situation, if Ukrainian government wanted to reject any American suggestions and propositions, it could be deathful for Ukraine and for Ukrainian government, even as so. It would provoke such deep crisis of Ukrainian United States relations, which during which I think Zelensky and his team were not able to survive. If we are talking about months ahead and so on. Moreover, it could open the straight road to the straight deal, a bilateral deal between the United States and Russia. So Ukraine had a lot of risks and dangers in that moment, and so Ukraine had to sign everything which United States suggested. But Ukraine tried to trade at that moment, and Ukraine, as I understand, Ukraine was standing on the position of the security guarantees for Ukraine, on the access to NATO to Ukraine, on the involving the European partners of Ukraine, especially France and Great Britain, to the negotiation process, on the borders question and territorial question also. There were a lot of questions and claims from Ukrainian side, but almost nothing was supported by the United States in Jeddah. only unfreezing, only unblocking the military aid, intelligent aid Ukraine achieved during that negotiation. And I want to emphasize one more thing. I absolutely agree with Marina that you know, guys, that no one believed before that Trump is really able to move this situation, to push forward this situation from a very hard position when this war, Ukrainian-Russian war, stacked during the last 3 years. But this under pressure agreement with Ukraine, not only agreement but common statement, shows us how powerful is now Trump and his administration. He is able, and no one is able to reject Trump. No, not Ukraine, not Europe, even nor Russia in this moment.
I just would like to elaborate a bit on Ruslan's point. Thank you very much, Ruslan, for sharing the same views. I just want to verbalize some statement, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I do believe that we don't know 90% of everything what was discussed. That's number one. What worries me that we had no even the slightest hint on so-called very important mineral deal.
Yeah.
So where is mineral deal? So what is that? Third, it is not. It is sort of a revenge, because I'm very much afraid that Ukrainians, they just underestimated the personal relationship between teams, and somehow they decided not to pay a lot of attention to those relationships, and that is a crucial mistake. And the last one, we do remember 2017 when the telephone call between President Trump and Mr. Zelensky was recorded, and somehow it was leaked to both countries' mass media, right?
Yeah.
And that is, according to my humble opinion, is a route of the rest steps towards Mr. Zelensky from Trump's administration. I do understand that I might be too personal, but something tells me that those leaders with such huge ambition and very bright leaders, they remember things very well.
I absolutely agree. It was also a lessons of maybe humiliation lessons from United States administration toward to Ukrainian partners after previous behavior, which was not clear and honest at the same moment, because that scandal in Oval Room, it was of course it was an attempt to raise the stakes from Ukrainian side, to argue with United States president in Oval Room was not able. No one leader in the world before. I can't remember such example. So it was a revenge also, and political revenge, and Ukraine had to accept these lessons, because there was no any chance to survive at this moment without United States support.
Colleagues, if we go back to negotiations between the United States and Ukraine, in my opinion, the most tangible thing for Ukraine is the fact that United States has agreed to defreeze the paused aid in terms of the military supplies and in terms of the intelligence information exchange between the United States and Ukraine. And for United States, the biggest achievement was, as you guys mentioned, that Trump administration was able to finally shift a very frozen, stuck conflict with a dead end into a political discussion, into negotiations with a potential solution and a light at the end of this whole conflict. Is that correct, or there is something that I'm missing here?
I would like just to add that probably a bigger goal which United States sees for itself is an open or not open, it's to launch at least some minimal dialogue with Russia. Please remember how often President Trump repeated that before, for years, for decades, United States didn't talk to Russia, and both countries have nukes, as Mr. Trump says. So Ukraine here, is a tool or reason why we would start talking to Russia in a slightly different manner, not in the manner of Cold War, not in the manner of progressive liberal politicians, but in very specific Trump's approach, deal maker manner. So even in that situation, Ukraine is used. And what can I say? It is a sad story for Ukrainians, but that is a great story for United States.
And I absolutely agree with your summarizing, James. But only want to add one thing. If you will see for this negotiation process like a triangle, United States, Russia, and Ukraine is the weakest place in this dialogue. So, because Ukraine is very dependent on the United States and from West in general, more than half of Ukrainian budget, 80% of military support, everything is going on from the West. And of course, Trump has to negotiate with Russia, but Trump is not going to negotiate with Ukraine because the level of dependence of Ukraine doesn't give Ukraine any chance to real negotiate. Ukraine may ask, Ukraine may suggest something, but Ukraine is not in the position for negotiate with Trump, unfortunately.
May I ask the question with what country Ukraine is able to negotiate at this point, Ruslan?
Russia is able because Russia is not so dependent from United States.
No, I'm talking about Ukraine. Whether there is any other countries with which Ukraine is able to negotiate, being a strong, having a strong position. I just don't think there are any.
You are provoking me for a very bad answer. Ukraine is able to negotiate from this strong position with the Russian Federation.
I think that sometimes we need to be extremely pragmatic and very simplistic in describing complicated geopolitical issues or pictures. And we have to say that at this stage, Ukraine is not a player, unfortunately. And that is something which should be accepted by Ukrainian elite as well. As a country, it needs much more very professional politicians, diplomats, government institutions, freedom, democracy. And after some period of time, with the support of other partners and with the financial support of other partners, Ukraine might be a very serious player. But at this stage, to expect from Ukraine to be any serious partner during negotiations is too ambitious. Country is just too tired and too wounded by all those wars and conflicts which have been in Ukraine since 2014. That's my perspective.
Colleagues, one of the other outcomes that we have achieved out of these negotiations, it's a proposition for a 30-day ceasefire.
Sorry, James, sorry for interruption, but it's really like that old joke about that sheep was afraid of the wolf, but the shepherd ate this sheep, not the wolf. And Marina is absolutely right. Ukrainian dependence from the West is not making Ukraine like an equal negotiator not only with the West, but also with the rest of the world, because West also is very influential on Ukrainian international policy and so on. We remember how many scandals was between the Ukraine, for example, in China, Motor Sich scandal,
Yes.
and so on, so on. So Ukrainian president is very brave person. He is very passionate person, but he hasn't tools and instrument of influence for in the real world. And when that real world, especially the Western world, was without the strong leaders, because the West last decades was without the strong leaders. It was the one situation from in policy situation. It looks like Zelensky made a big influence on the West. But when that strong leader appeared in the West, we are talking about the Trump, the situation is quite different. The situation is quite different, and
Absolutely.
Ukrainian interests are ignored not only by the Trump, but look what is Great Britain and France now are talking for Ukraine. You need to adapt to Trump. You need to find solution. You need to make apologizes, and so on, so on, so on. Sorry
Oh
for
God, Ruslan, we knew from the very beginning that it's going to be the case because Great Britain is still an empire and France is still would like to be an empire number one European country with nukes. So those two countries are using Ukraine as well. That's exactly what we've discussed before, that if you look at the map, each country has something for its development, political diplomacy development, even economic goals out of Ukraine war and conflict, except Ukraine. And I hate to say that I do understand that it is a geopolitics, it's very complicated, in fact not, but at the end of the day, it's national elite of Ukraine, which should have protected country, people, and democratic institutions. That's the end of the story. It's a sad story, but that's truth, and we have to live with that.
Colleagues, I would like to go back to negotiations. And one of the things that also came out of these negotiations and a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire, which Ukraine had no choice but to say that they will go for that if things will play out the way that Ukraine perceives as safe for Ukraine. But what is more surprising is that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has not rejected that proposal, but presented conditions that have to be met in order to proceed with the ceasefire. Marina, why the United States came up with that idea of a 30-day ceasefire? What are the real goals behind that proposition for a 30-day ceasefire?
Thank you, James. I personally think that everything was planned earlier, much more earlier. At least 2 months ago, more or less clear goals were set up by President Trump's team. And I'm absolutely sure that to launch that 30 days period was the first step towards Easter peace deal. Why I'm so sure? Because this year we have Easter, and from the Catholic and Orthodox camps, Easter is going to be at the same day. So it's a very great symbol. It outlines President Trump's agenda, that he is a great peacemaker and potentially he is the person who should have Nobel Prize for Peace. And at the same time, he explains to the rest of the world, and mainly to Americans, have a look. I believe in God. I understand how important human life is. And that was the tool which I used to talk to Putin. I'm not talking to President Putin about anything else. I'm talking to President Putin on the basis of the religious values. That is very clever, neutral position to use beliefs or to use religion as a neutral platform for the further negotiations. I believe that is clever.
Ruslan, the conditions that the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has named are to stop the mobilization in Ukraine, to make sure that Ukraine is not going to join NATO, that it will be officially signed, are extremely painful and dangerous for Ukraine. How could Ukraine accept those conditions, or what's going to be their game plan or strategy in regards to continue negotiating and finding a balanced position, a neutral position between Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine, United States, and Russia?
It's not so hard conditions for Ukraine. It's a hard condition for Ukrainian elites, which leaded a lot of elections, gathered a lot of votes and power on the statements about Ukrainian member in Europe Union and NATO in previous years. So it means the broke of such approach, which Ukrainian elites developed during 20 years in Ukraine and captured the power on this approach. If you are talking about Ukrainian society, if you're talking about mobilization, or if you're talking about military support of NATO, that is quite possible, because today in Ukraine, the main demand from Ukrainian society is peace. Ukrainians want peace. Ukrainians want end of the war. The Ukrainians still have a different view on the peace, but the main request is for peace. I'm sure maybe Ukraine needs some kind of referendum on this question. Maybe Ukraine needs a referendum and new elections in Ukraine, because the question of ties between society and political elites, between society and parliament, between society and government and president, is not clear, and there is a significant gap between the public opinion and opinion on Ukrainian political elites and passionate part of Ukrainian society. We need to resolve it through the referendum or some kind of elections and so on. Of course, Putin is trying to make some kind of diversion toward to Ukraine. He's trying to stop the military supplies for Ukraine, to stop the mobilization in Ukraine. He's trying to block only one achievement of Ukraine in negotiation in Jeddah. We are talking about the unfreezing the military aid for Ukraine, but it's also a game. And it looks like for me that Ukrainian government still doesn't believe in possible ceasefire. They are believing that there will not be any agreement between the United States and Russia. They are not thinking that it's possible for nowadays. They are living in very old political paradigm. They are trying to play this game because they are not able to reject Trump, and they don't understand how close country now going on to the peace end.
But just on to elaborate on that, Ruslan, it's not only a Ukrainian elite which doesn't believe in peace. If you look at mass media or talks of American elite, pro-democratic party elite, they announced that President Putin said no to American proposition after Jeddah. But that is not true. But the main message inside of America from the liberals that Putin refused, he doesn't want, he didn't want, he never wanted. And those narratives are very popular.
Of course, they wanted it very much. They will be very happy, extremely happy if Putin will just say no. And it means the continuation of the war, and it means that liberals and Biden was right in his behavior, in his approach toward Russia. But Putin is very, very experienced person, and he is not going to say no. He is saying yes, but we have conditions. And it looks like I've heard just the statements from the Secretary of State of Rubio. He said that we are considering the Russian conditions, and it's quite possible the negotiation on them.
Colleagues, we're running out of time, but something that I would like to discuss next episode, and we're probably going to have more updates and more information, is what are the next steps and conditions and how the negotiations will unpack moving forward and how we're going to see the peaceful plan potentially coming into practice. But for today, thank for both of you for participating in all your insightful comments and analysis of the situation. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Thank
James.
you.
Bye-bye, colleagues. And friends,
Bye.
don't forget to subscribe for our channel. Thank you very much.